Hello and welcome back from your holiday break. This is the Flow Effect, and on this week's episode, we're going deep into how you can tie some real world relevance into your behavior plan. This week's episode, our guest is Mr. Jason Haniger. He's going to talk to us about how sports and activities impacted his leadership, how it's impacting his students in school, and how he's tied financial literacy into his behavior program using Live School. I think this is one you're going to like. Happy listening.
No time, no tools, big expectations. How do you transform school culture without derailing the train? Answer: little wins that bring big changes. The flywheel effect. Harnessing the power of momentum to create a school culture that celebrates change and drives itself.
I always do quite a bit of prep for these podcasts, and I always learn things about our guests that I may not have known, like when we scheduled or booked. And like when I was looking you up, Jason, like the first thing that pops up is like batting averages. So I was like, is this the same guy? Like, yeah, he's on like Baseball Perspective and everything. Like, tell us a little bit about how your career as an athlete eventually impacted your career as a school leader.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised my brother's name wasn't the first thing that came up. Maybe it was, but no, baseball's been in our family's blood. My brother and I both played collegiately, and then were drafted. He's in the major leagues now for the Seattle Mariners, and then my two cousins on my mother's side both played Division I baseball and played professionally in the minor leagues. So it's definitely been a part of who we are as a family and as individuals. But it's impacted me significantly as a school leader. I think as I was a teacher and an administrator in the building, the more we got to see kids get involved in a school-based activity, the better we saw from them as far as behavior, as far as their effort in the classroom, caring about the school community in general. And I think you see that often big time at the high school level, but it exists at the middle school level as well. And that's even beyond sports, just finding an activity to be involved in. But it impacted me in a lot of ways. One is collaboration, right? So when you're a part of a team, you're working towards a common goal. And for a school leader, it's important to be able to whole groups of people that have maybe different personalities, different learning styles, different leading styles, and getting them to collaborate around a common goal. Another way I feel it helped me was preparation. To be an athlete, you have to put in the work. You have to be willing to outwork your competitors and who you're going to compete with on the field. And so from a school leader, I think as people progress in their careers, it's easy to go through the motions. But I believe you should be the first one there and the last one to leave. I think it helped me a ton being a team captain at Georgia Tech and also in high school by leading not only with words, but with actions. You often can see people having strengths in either area and sometimes both, but I think it's important to back up our words with actions. Accountability. I think in sports, it's a great preparation that if you don't perform, you're going to be held accountable, whether that's not playing or getting cut or your team not being successful. Baseball is a great sport, in my opinion, because you fail often. You have to reflect on those failures, learn from them, and then adjust. I think even public speaking, so from being an athlete, especially at a Division I, you're going to be in the public eye. You're going to have interviews. You're going to have to speak to the media. And from a school leader standpoint, you're going to potentially speak to media. You're going to speak in front of parents and large groups of people. So I thought that definitely prepared me for that. And then the last thing is competition. So I think how does that come out in being a school leader? It's just about wanting to be the best, not necessarily for you as an individual, but for the parents and the students and the staff that you serve.
Oh, I agree with all those. There's one that I think that is a little bit goes under the radar a little bit, is that the piece where you've got to talk to the local reporters sometimes, and that's the first time you do that. If you've never done it, it's kind of like it's a little bit unnerving, like because you got to speak on behalf of this organization, not like on behalf of you. I mean, but you got to do that all the time in sports because you got to talk on behalf of your team. The one other thing I would add to it is this is like from a personal perspective, was how you deal with adversity, and that which happens all the time in schools, particularly if you're in a leadership position in schools. And a lot of people don't hear or see half of the adversity that comes on that principal's plate. Um, but in sports, things happen, and you just have to keep going. You just have to find a way. Like you can't, like if you're coaching or you're playing, you don't really have time to say, "Woe is me! Oh, this is happening. I guess we're just going to go home." Like you just find a way. So I'll give you kind of an example. Last year, there was a sub shortage, pretty much nationwide. You probably had that at your school, I'm sure. It was just hard to find subs after the pandemic, and to compound that, you would have the COVID policies where if somebody was in contact, the teacher would be out for up to 10 days. So like we didn't have enough subs, and we had these like automatics where we'd lose teachers for 2 weeks at a time. So, but we're still running the school at 60 to 75% every day. So you're trying to find subs, and every morning, like our secretary would tell us, all right, this is how many people are out. This is how many subs are coming. This is how many we have uncovered. Help. And we'd have, you know, 20 minutes before school started to figure it out, and we'd get them all covered. Had I not like had such an experience in athletics, I think I would have heard that every morning and went, well, I guess we don't have school today. But like that happens in sports. Like people get injured, and then you put in the backup. You figure it out. You know what I mean? You move the shortstop to second base, and like you work it out. Stuff happens, but I felt like those things uniquely prepare you to be in leadership positions, which is why it happens a lot, I think.
So, Jason, before the break, you were talking about financial literacy as the big thing you would change. With any subject, I think there's kind of the opportunity to do it in a more paper and pencil way or a more project-based learning and hands-on learning. There's the John Dewey quote, learn by doing. So really curious when it comes to financial literacy, how you approach this. So it wasn't just another book exercise for kids, but it was something that they really could live. It's one thing to just fill out a test about financials. It's another to make that decision if you're going to buy that shiny item or if you're going to save or invest. So how did you go about that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So you're 100% right. And the research, and not even just beyond research, just looking at the facts, consumer debt continues to be an issue across America. I think when we were exploring this option, one of the rationale I gave was, it was like September of 2021 or 2020, whenever it was when we were doing the research for it, the average consumer still had around $8,000 in consumer debt. And so financial literacy programs exist. There's courses that you can take that schools sometimes provide or that other organizations can help with. I think I just read Michael Jordan invested a ton of money in a program for a specific students can apply and be a part of being recipients of that. And so the interest and the attempts have been there, but they're not making a substantial difference on consumer behavior. And so some of the interesting articles I read, which make complete sense, which tie to what you said regarding Dewey's quote, is that if we just teach kids a bunch of content and knowledge about what interest is, what is a loan, why, what is good debt versus bad debt, it's going to go in through one ear and out the other until they're forced to have to apply and use that information, which is typically much farther down the road for most kids. So our biggest thing was, we're going to give them what they need when they need it, but we're going to put them in an environment where they're going to have to start using financial savvy in making decisions. Some are going to do great and some are going to fail, but it's in a safe environment where that's okay. And it's not real money and doesn't have real world implications. Then alongside with that, when they need that information, we'll teach it with experts in the field of finance or just with crafting stuff ourselves. And so our big thing for kids was, we want to provide them currency to use and to save and to invest. And so for us, that was through Live School, the Live School points that they were earning. We wanted to give them daily, I use the word temptations, but daily opportunities for them to spend. So that could have been food-based stuff. It could be experience-based things. Like we put together a video game room for kids to do during homeroom. They could buy access to that. We were fortunate enough to have their feeder elementary school right next door. And so they could pay live school points to go and spend time with their former teachers, or, have lunch over there, whatever it may be, hang out at recess. So we had those daily temptations. We also ran a weekly auction. So think eBay. We would advertise through our morning video-based announcements 5 or 6 things that we had acquired through our school-based school-to-business partnerships, and then kids could bid on those throughout the week. And then finally, we had long-term things they could save for. So every quarter, there was a big event that kids could use live school points to purchase to be able to attend. And most, if not everything at that event was free to them through our partnerships. And so kids had to figure out how to save. So in the real world, we have to save for college education, for a car, for a home, whatever that may be, but also manage the day-to-day temptations of just living life. And then finally, we wanted to show the kids the power or the risk of investment and different tools in which they could do that. And so at the end of every quarter, if they didn't spend their balance, they could choose to donate their balance of live school points to their house for the house competition, or they could choose to invest it. And so each quarter we introduced them to a different tool, whether that was just the stock market, CDs, bonds, cryptocurrency, things of that nature. And it was shocking. I was able to go in and teach some lessons to 5th graders. It was shocking to see how well they picked up on things. And that really, there isn't an age that's too young to start with starting to give kids the practice and the opportunity to engage with decision making relative to finances. So, it was learned by doing.
I love the layers of decisions that you put into the program. Like having a token economy, there's a lot of folks that do that, but the fact that they had all these decisions to make daily and long term, there was a ability to invest it. I think for the vast, because you said there's not a lot of financial education required. I think for most graduates, it doesn't really give that much more than I should make more than I spend. I think that it kind of ends there. And then when you get into, they start learning about debt, they realize that that's not always true. And then they get themselves in trouble. But all those layers, all those decisions, that's just, I think you're equipping those kids with something that's going to potentially change their lives. I think it's a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah, it was great. And I mean, just even from hearing from parents and the conversations that they were having at home, just solidified that, man, they would have never had these. The likelihood of them having these discussions at this age is probably pretty slim. So that was definitely value added there.
I've got to imagine that was a lot for you and your team to manage. I mean, I know you were using live schools. Sounds like you were doing a lot way beyond what the live school product on its own does. I'm just curious to learn a little bit more. I mean, how big was the school, and what was it like trying to run a system where, like any economic system, it's got to be fair, it's got to be efficient. Otherwise, the people participating aren't gonna really buy into it. So I'm guessing you had a lot going on behind the scenes to kind of create this rich learning environment for kids.
Yeah, no doubt. So I was blessed to have a group of folks that assisted us in a number of ways. But more importantly, I think when you integrate it into the culture and the existence of school itself, in the beginning, there's a lot of front loading and heavy lifting. But once it becomes a normal part of the process of the way the school functions, I think it doesn't become as hard to manage. So I'll kind of talk you through, what we would do. In the mornings, I was responsible for the distribution of points. We made the decision to distribute to kids prior to arrival, and then they could always earn above and beyond if they were deserving. But if they were not hitting behavior or work ethic expectations, they would lose throughout the day. So I took care of that piece. Our one of our attendance admin assistants, she would monitor attendance, which she already does. That's already a function of her job throughout the day. And so simply, it was just an added piece of taking in live school if they were not present for that class to earn those points, even though they already got paid out. So from an attendance standpoint, she navigated that. When we talk about those daily purchases, other than a hat or hood pass, kids couldn't necessarily just walk into the office and say, I want to buy XYZ now. What we had them do was fill out a Google form, and one of my other admin assistants, she would navigate the form. So she would see, okay, so and so requested a visit to the elementary, so and so requested a visit to the arcade room, and she would charge their account appropriately in Live School. And then we would use Google Calendar to set up when that kid would do those things. So let's just say, Matt, you bought the arcade room. She would go onto Google Calendar. She would add you to that invite during the time that you had available per our schedule. And then it would send the email to the kid. So a side benefit of this is our kids in middle school, we're learning how to use email. We're learning how to use Google Calendar in ways that they would not have been exposed to otherwise. And like kids would come by and say, hey, when do I have the arcade room? I'd say, have you checked your Google Calendar? And they'd say, no. And then they'd go check and they would know exactly when to be in there. So she would help with that. She would also help with the weekly auction. So we'd cut it off at a certain time. She would run the Google form report, and then she would give the highest bidder their auction item. And I would be in charge of distributing it on Friday and announcing it on morning announcements. So we worked together in tandem on that. School-based partnerships with businesses and getting donations and things of that nature, that was under my realm, which I think anybody can handle that, but I think administrators should definitely, take the lead on that. My instructional coach, she was instrumental in working with me and other financial partners to provide the lessons when appropriate, right? So we worked with Northwestern Mutual to provide a lesson on diversification. We worked with the Federal Reserve on the stock market. So she would work with them to create a slide deck to be able to provide to our teachers as well. And then when it came to those quarterly incentives that they were saving for, I would typically gather all that information at the end of the quarter, working with my admin assistant, figuring out who purchased, charging their account, and then developing the plans associated with that. And then an instrumental piece in any of this, whether you do financial literacy or not, for Live School is to have a teacher-based committee. So we had a teacher-based committee for Live School, and they would be a part of what's working, what's not, what are our expectations regarding teacher use, things of that nature. And so that too was very instrumental. When it came to the investing and managing how those were going, that kind of fell on my plate, but that ended up being 2 to 3 hours a quarter. So very manageable. But yeah, I think I hit some of the major components of who was involved in making that happen.
So it's an impressive program. I want to touch on one thing because the show is the flywheel effect. It's all about little changes that have big momentum. There's one very specific little decision that you had in that program that made it all work, and that was that use of scheduling the rewards through Google Calendar, because a lot of the things hinged on your front office staff helping a lot. And if kids just came in there all the time, they would have been bogged down. They wouldn't have been as bought in, and it would have hurt logistically. So that decision early on, that's that little decision that has a big impact. You know what I'm saying? And the fact that they were learning organization, they learned how to use the calendars, and it made them a little bit more tech savvy. All that stuff had such a good benefit. So those are the little wins we're looking for on this show. Just teaching your kids how to use Google Calendar made a huge difference.
Yeah, even adults too, right?
Yeah, you guys also created, I think I counted 2, but at least one. Sounds like basically upfront investments, right? So it sounds like you guys bought a video game console and were able to find a room to set it up, something like that. But that's so cool because I got to imagine for a student to be able to book that out. I don't know if they could do it with friends or how that worked, but I mean, what a way to create this recurring source of awesomeness for kids, right? I mean, I'm just imagining that was pretty fun for kids to be able to do that and really have your own little nook and play some video games.
Was homeroom enough time to get a game of Madden in?
Yeah, so we had this chunk of time in the day that was basically an hour long. 20 minutes of it was lunch, 23, and then the rest was essentially we would do social and emotional learning lessons on Mondays. We would provide interventions. Kids could retake tests, work on homework, things of that nature. So we felt that was the best place to be able to provide that opportunity for them. And yeah, Matt, sometimes we'd have 2 to 4 kids in there at a time, getting to play games and such. And what was cool was most of what kids wanted, shockingly, was more experience based and free, more so than I thought it was going to be tangible and cost lots of money. And so when we worked with kids to build out our token economy of what they would spend money on, I was just shocked to hear all the things that, wow, this is great. We don't have to spend money to be able to provide these opportunities for them. Something like on the arcades up front, yes, but that's a gift that will keep on giving, and not something that you're having to keep buying over and over and over again.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, you could use that year after year potentially, and kids could spend thousands of points, just getting that time. If you don't mind us asking, like, do you remember what the budget looked like for all the rewards and incentives?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when we did our webinar a month ago, one thing that I spoke to on that was we had a student incentive account, and when I came into the principalship, and we did not do a school wide fundraiser in the 2 years I was there, which is pretty uncommon. What our front office did, though, was after school hours, we'd go to Costco, we'd buy sodas, drinks, snacks, and then we also got stuff donated to us. And then kids would buy that upon dismissal to either the car rider line or the buses. And so that was a huge help in funding some of our needs with that. But we did not spend a lot of money. I don't have all the numbers in front of me, but I know that I didn't have to run a school-based wide-based fundraiser to pull it off. The snack sales was critical, but more importantly, the year leading up to this, it was spent on getting people to be passionate about what we were trying to accomplish, and then asking them, how can you best support us? Is that by providing product for free? Is it by providing a service for free? Is it gift cards? What is it that you guys, to help us pull this off, knowing that, we're going to need to be able to provide something to kids to spend on? How can you help us bring this vision to life? And so we were very fortunate to have a strong group of partners that helped us with that, which then made it very easy to not have to spend a lot of money on it.
That's awesome.
I think that this is a little aggressive, but I think every school in America should run this. I think you could do simplest, and I think what would be cool is if a district did some scaled version of this, starting in elementary all the way up through high school, because the needs and the wants of kids are going to be different, and the level and the degree into which you can dive deeper can shift. I mean, something that if I were still there, that we would have started to dive into potentially this year or the following year is taxes. Like, how does that work? And how could we integrate that into live school? So do kids need to budget for a certain amount to be able to pay out at the end of the quarter? If they don't pay out, what are the consequences, I guess you could say, of not doing so? And all that's paid into it, where does it go? Like, so in our government, when we're sending in all this money for taxes, how is it used to better our lives and for the lives of those that need it? And what could we make that look like at our school building? So those were some of the conversations we were starting to have, is how can we make this as real life as possible? And the cool thing too is I think if you run live school in isolation, versus doing it with the lens of we want to make literate students in the world of finances, the decisions we were making and the rules and how we were setting things up, a question we'd often ask ourselves is this what happens in real life? Like, sometimes school doesn't always mirror, like, consequences, rewards, punishment doesn't always really match what happens in the real world. And how we are going to structure this should replicate what real life looks like outside of here to give kids that experience. So I think every school should do it. Some component of it. I think, our kids, when we surveyed our kids, they gave positive feedback that it impacted their behavior, their work ethic, their attendance, and obviously their knowledge when it comes to financial literacy. Something we talked about in the webinar too is when you're trying to secure funding to help make this a reality, even though I don't think it requires very much, but if you want to enhance it even more, there's a lot of banks that will serve as partners. And if you serve in a low income community, the banking institutions have accreditation system, similar to school districts have. And one thing that we look at is called CRA, which is the Community Reinvestment Act. And if you are focused on a low income area, banks are getting credit for finding ways to invest. And often they do so in ways that tie to financial literacy. So that's one of the first places we looked and tried to attack, I guess you could say. But we found that our area wasn't within the threshold to meet those expectations. So I definitely think low income school districts that are serving students and families of that demographic, that's going to help tremendously with trying to secure funding. I'm a huge proponent of it. Absolutely.
I'm glad you went aggressive because that was kind of what I was hoping you would say, and I totally agree with you because if you're trying to make things more real to life, some more experiences in school, setting your kids up to be financially responsible and financially literate, there's there's not a whole lot better places to start. I think like that's something that's going to impact them for the rest of their lives. So I think I really like the program. I really like what you're doing, and I like that you went aggressive with it because I was going to back you up for that. What kind of impact did this have on things like student behavior, school culture, even academics, things we do have tangible numbers on? Did this have a positive impact on that?
Yeah, and I would say some of them are easy to speak to, and then others, it's hard to measure and hard to know for certain. So something to keep in consideration, right, is like the first year I was there, we were in a hybrid setting. So we had kids that just missed a whole quarter of school and now are there every other day. So some of our classes had 5, 6 students in them when we were in the hybrid. So behaviors were non-existent, right? They didn't even know how to interact or talk with each other. Even our teachers were like, I don't know how to teach a class of 5 or 6. Like I never thought I would have heard somebody say that. And so then we moved back to full in person. So now you have kids that have not operated in a normal school setting for nearly a year, all back together. So behavior was tough everywhere, 100%. But in our numbers from a referral standpoint, we're still at a it was still on par with where it had been pre-pandemic. But I think most of the country, when I'm listening to podcasts, when I'm talking with other colleagues, it was as it was worse than what it was pre-pandemic. So, or at least there was that shock to the system for the kids and for the adults of coming back. So, but what I will say that I think live school does a great job of, if it's used with fidelity throughout the building, is it has a massive impact on school to family communication, right? Like, so my kids are all in elementary. I have no idea how my kids are doing behaviorally or work ethic wise unless I hear it from the parent teacher conferences, right? Which is 1 to 2 times a year. Live school is an in-day look to progress on a daily basis all throughout the year. And so, parents are getting to see that this is an ongoing problem, not only maybe with this one person, but across the board. Or vice versa. Maybe it is only happening in one class. And now we have the data to examine that and look into that deeper to be able to figure out what's happening. Is it because the kid's struggling with reading? Is it because they struggle with math? Is it a personality issue? And so live school for us, what it helped increase tremendously was data, the use of data, communication to home. We chose to do house competition. So we created vertical communities, 5th through 8th grade, and attached staff from throughout the building to those houses as well. It From the kids' perspective, as I mentioned before, they felt that it strongly impacted their attendance, their behavior, their work ethic, and financial understanding and application. And then for me, I think it just provided a ton of real world experiences for kids and classroom based connections, right? Like there was definitely standards in the math curriculum that directly tied to investing, what that we were doing with live school investments. And then even social studies, right? Like examining history and understanding the stock market and how things are happening and drawing connections there too. So I think there are natural connections to existing curriculum and coursework as well.
Very cool. Well, Jason, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here. we'll link your webinar and case studies and all those things in the show notes. Is there any other way folks can find you?
Yeah, I have a LinkedIn profile. I'm more than happy if you guys want to include my cell phone or my personal email account. I think, even though I'm not currently in an educating role, I've switched industries for the time being and foreseeable future. But this is by far the thing I'm most passionate about. And after the webinar series, we had some folks reach out and just bounce ideas off of each other. So I'm happy to help however I can. I don't see this as something that's going to be pushed down upon people from a state or from a district. And so, if you're a listener, if you're a teacher or an administrator, and you're wanting to try to create this in some way, shape, or form, I'm happy to bounce ideas and collaborate, and what went right and what went wrong, and where we would have headed next if I were still there.
Awesome. Well, I'll include your contact info in the show notes. Matt, anything before we go?
No, appreciate your time, Jason. It's an awesome program you guys put together, and hopefully we see more of it in schools.
The flywheel effect, harnessing the power of momentum to create a school culture that celebrates change and drives itself.